Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. It is a Sunday. Hopefully everybody enjoyed the final Saturday of the regular season in the world of college football. Of course, with it being Thanksgiving weekend, we also had football all day long Friday. So there was not as many games as there normally is on Saturdays yesterday, but it was still rivalry weekend. There was still a lot of great games in the world of college football. And I encourage you to go back and watch yesterday's video if you have not watched it yet. I apologize that it was so late getting loaded, but here in my neck of the woods, late Friday night, early Saturday morning, somebody hit one of the towers. So the Wi Fi signal and service was terrible all day long yesterday, and that's why it took so long for the video to get loaded. And by the time it got loaded, it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And of course, by that time, everybody's watching the football games that are on instead of watching the video. But in yesterday's video, I talked about some of the games on Friday. So I encourage you to go back and watch that video from yesterday if you have not watched it yet. But as far as the games from yesterday, Georgia defeated Georgia Tech by the score of 37-14. So Georgia wins by 23. And the only reason I specify 23 is because earlier this week at work, me and a good friend of mine were talking about that game. And of course, he's a Georgia fan. So I told him, look, Georgia's not going to beat Georgia Tech as bad as Clemson did because they're not as good as Clemson is. And of course, I just said that being funny because everybody knows Georgia is way better than Clemson this year. It's not even close. But I was actually right because Georgia beat them by 23, and I want to say Clemson beat them 41-10, which would have been 31 points. But either way, it doesn't matter. Both teams beat them pretty handily because Georgia Tech's just not very good. But the Georgia offense looked a lot like the Georgia offense earlier in the year against Missouri. They just looked pitiful. They just could not get anything going offensively. But since Georgia Tech is so bad, it did not matter. So if you didn't watch the game and you just saw the score, you'd say, oh, well, Georgia won easily. And they did win easily because Georgia Tech is so bad. But their offense did struggle for a long time in that game yesterday. But those kind of things happen. Anybody's old enough to have a job, you know there are days when you just don't want to go to work. You just try to think of any reason you can to not go to work. So, of course, us as humans, if we're that way, football players are that way too. They're going to have 1 or 2 games a year where they just, for whatever reason, don't play their best. And for Georgia's offense, it was one of those days yesterday, but Georgia Tech's so bad it didn't matter. And of course, now Georgia Tech has to hire a permanent head coach. And it's funny because I hear a lot of people saying that their interim coach should be their full time coach. And then I hear people say that making the interim coach their permanent coach would be the dumbest thing they could ever do. But I'm sure they'll hire somebody coming up here during bowl season. Michigan defeats Ohio State by the score of 45-23. So if you didn't watch highlights or see the game, you would think Michigan won it pretty easily. It was actually Ohio State in the lead at halftime. In the second half, Ohio State's offense was pitiful, but it was still just Michigan 31, Ohio State 23 midway through the fourth quarter, and then Michigan scored 2 late touchdowns to win by 22. But for whatever reason, from about I would say week 8 on, Ohio State's offense just got consistently worse throughout the year, and I don't know why. They just all of a sudden cannot run the ball. And I know this day and time, college football is all about the quarterbacks, and if you can't throw the ball, you can't win. but you've got to have some sort of running game. And the last half of the season, the Buckeyes have just had no running game whatsoever. And CJ Stroud can run, but CJ Stroud just refuses to run. If he's back there to throw the ball and there's nobody open, he will not run. He will just stand there either until he gets sacked or until he throws the ball away. He will not run the ball. TCU won pretty handily. They defeat Iowa State by the score of 62-14. So TCU actually won a game pretty easily. Texas A&M defeats LSU 38-23. I don't know what it is about Jimbo Fisher, but he played good against LSU and they played good against Alabama, but then everybody else they played like a hot pile of doo-doo. But I said earlier in the week here on the channel that LSU is nowhere near a top 10 team. They were overhyping them for some stupid reason, and they showed last night that they're nowhere near a top 10 team. For whatever reason, people always think you have to have two SEC teams in the playoffs, which I do not understand, but people think that. So they had LSU overhyped, hoping they would win out and then beat Georgia, and then you'd have LSU and Georgia both in the playoffs. Of course, that's not happening now because not only is LSU going to lose to Georgia, but they lost to Texas A&M. They're probably a top 15 team, but they're no better than that. But unless we see some upsets this upcoming week in the conference championship games, we have our 4 playoff teams. You're going to have Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and USC. And of course, even if Georgia loses, they're in. Even if Michigan loses, they're in. But now if TCU or USC lose, my guess would be Ohio State would get the 4th playoff spot. Now, if they by some chance both lose, then we're just going to have absolute mayhem. But I don't think there's a chance both of them lose, but one of them might. And the only reason why I say Ohio State is because we'll find out Tuesday night where Ohio State is going to be ranked. But my guess is they're going to be 5th. But after Ohio State, everybody else has 2 losses. And we've never seen a 2-loss team make the playoffs. So my guess would be Ohio State. But if by some chance they both lose, then we're going to have either one of the teams that lose still go to the playoffs, or we're going to have a 2-loss team in the playoffs. USC, speaking of the Trojans, they defeat Notre Dame by the score of 38-27, and it wasn't that close. Alabama defeats Auburn 49-27. Now, of course, there's a big rumor going around that Hugh Freeze is going to be the next head coach at Auburn, and as of this video, he has not yet been hired, but supposedly that's who they want, and they've been targeting him for at least 3 weeks. And you know, for the last 2 weeks, there's been the rumor going around that they wanted Lane Kiffin. Now, there's an old saying that when you hear these rumors this time of the year with these coaches, there's 3 reasons why you hear the rumors. One reason is they're not rumors. They're actually factually accurate. You just have to wait until the right time to announce the hire. The second reason is it's a smokescreen, and it allows the upper management and the big shots of these universities to actually go out and target who they really want. And in this case, it looks like that's what's happened, because we've heard all this talk for at least 2 weeks about Lane Kiffin. But Auburn says they want Hugh Freeze. They're talking to Hugh Freeze. But nobody's talked about it because everybody's been so focused on Lane Kiffin that behind the scenes they're targeting somebody totally different, and nobody had any idea. So they allow these rumors to keep going on to let them do the real work behind the scenes. And the third reason is coaches do it because it gives them leverage in their contracts, because their ADs at their school says, well, I better give him a raise. If he's talking about leaving and contemplating leaving, I better give him a raise, make him stay, which I've never understood because not just in Lane Kiffin's case, but any of these cases, these coaches don't talk to the other schools. Their agents do. So if Lane Kiffin was going to leave, they would know that because all they got to do is ask his agent. Lane Kiffin's not going to tell you. Lane Kiffin never talked to Auburn. His agent talked to Auburn. So since the agents talk, if he was actually going to leave and thought about leaving, was going to leave, they would know. But the schools still say, well, I better give him a raise. He's going to leave. And those are the three reasons why you hear all these rumors this time of the year about coaches. It's either not a rumor, it's factually accurate, or it's a smokescreen to allow them to do the real work behind the scenes, or coaches are getting leverage and getting a contract raise and a contract extension because their school thinks they're going to leave. South Carolina defeats Clemson by the score of 31-30. And honestly, really, truly, Clemson losing by 1 point, they should be happy. I believe in the second half, the entire second half, they had 86 yards of offense, 13 yards passing, and that's absolutely abysmal, absolutely pitiful. So they had not lost a home game in 6 years. That ended. They had won 68 straight games when leading at the half. That ended. A lot of people are mad because in the second quarter, when they were up by 9 points, they tried a trick play on a kickoff, and it worked up until Phil Maffa, as he was getting tackled, he fumbled the ball. The Gamecocks recovered on Clemson's 37-yard line, I think. They scored a touchdown and made it 16-14. And it was, in my personal opinion, a bad decision because I don't see why you need to run a trick play in the second quarter when you're up by 9 points. But I'm not one of these Clemson fans that's going to sit here and tell you that was a difference in the game. It was score-wise because you gave the Gamecocks a touchdown and you lost by 1. But it was the second quarter, early second quarter. So you had at least 2.5 quarters to make up for that fumble, and you didn't do it. So you can't come back 2.5 quarters later when you've had all those possessions, all those chances to make up for that dumb decision and not do it, and then blame that loss on that decision. You had time to overcome it. You didn't. Now, if you do it with a minute to go in the game, then yeah, I can say, okay, that cost you the game. But it's second quarter. You've got plenty of chances to make up for it, and they just didn't do it. But earlier this year, when they played Notre Dame, they got away from the run game. And after the game, Brandon Streeter came out and said, we should have ran the ball more. And yesterday, I kind of feel like it was the same thing. Will Shipley averaged 8.5 yards a carry. So if you're having absolutely no success whatsoever throwing the football, and you've got a running back giving you 8 yards a carry, run the ball every stinking play. If Shipley gets tired, you also have Phil Maffa, who's just as good as Shipley is. There's no reason to throw the ball 30 times when you can't complete a forward pass. It looked like last year's offense. DJ had 5 or 6 pitiful throws, but he also had at least 5 throws I can think of off the top of my head. They hit the receivers right in the hands, and they just flat out dropped them. Our receivers have been bad for 2 years. Clemson used to be wide receiver U, not anymore. We might have 4 and 5 star guys out of high school, but on the field, for whatever reason, their development the last 2 years has been pitiful. They can't catch, they can't block, they can't create separation. So when you can't throw the ball, there ain't a whole lot, honestly, that you can do except for run the ball. When you can't throw the ball and you've got 2 great running backs, run the ball. But I'm surprised that they didn't put Cade Klubnik in the game because Dabo said last week that Clemson's played 11 games this year. 9 games, the DJ was good, and 2 games, DJ was bad. Yesterday, he wasn't bad. He was just mediocre, but you could tell by the third quarter that he just was having a bad game. And the other two times he's had a bad game, they took him out. They didn't yesterday. Not that it would have done any good because when you can't throw, you can't throw. But I was surprised to see that he struggled in two games earlier in the year and got taken out, and he struggled yesterday, and there was no sign of him coming out of the game. Oregon State defeats Oregon 38-34. And I want to say Oregon was actually ahead in that game 31-10. And Oregon State comes back and beats them. Tennessee makes up for their loss last week. They defeat Vanderbilt by the score of 56-0. Penn State has a 10-win season. They defeat Michigan State by the score of 35-16. Kansas State wins the Battle of Kansas. They defeat Kansas 47-27. Utah beats probably the worst team in Power 5 football this year, the Colorado Buffaloes, by the score of 63-21. Central Florida defeats South Florida by the score of 46-39. Kentucky beats their rival, Louisville, 26-13. Both teams finished the season with a record of 7 wins and 5 losses. Illinois beats Northwestern 41-3. Minnesota defeats Wisconsin 23-16. Duke beats one of their rivals 34-31. Duke used to end the regular season playing North Carolina, another one of their rivals, but now they play Wake Forest. North Carolina plays NC State. But if you follow college basketball, you know they call those schools Tobacco Road. That's Duke, Wake Forest, North Carolina, NC State, because they're all so close together. So really you could play any of those teams last game of the year and you're playing your rival. Pittsburgh beats Miami by the score of 42-16. Washington in the game late last night defeats Washington State by the score of 51-33. And Purdue wins their half of the Big Ten because of Iowa's loss to Nebraska on Friday. They defeat Indiana by the score of 30-16. And I know I said back around week 2 or 3 this year that I thought Purdue had a chance to have a pretty good season, and they're playing in the Big Ten championship. But I also said earlier this year here on the channel that I thought if Michael Penix Jr. could stay healthy, that the Huskies had a chance to be a top 10 team. And with that win last night over the Cougars, they finished 10-2 in the regular season. And with all the top 10 teams losing yesterday, and they were just outside the top 10, they may finish the regular season inside the top 10. So it was good to see Michael Penix Jr. actually have a full season where he could play the full season and stay healthy the whole season. And of course, 1 week from today, next Sunday, we will have all the bowl games announced as far as who's going where. The rumor going around is that Clemson is going to play Alabama if they win their conference championship game in the Orange Bowl. I hope not. The way Clemson's offense looks, even though Clemson has won 2 recent national championships by beating Alabama, 3 of the 4 games have been close. 1 year, the second championship Clemson won, they destroyed Bama. That was the game that everybody said, oh, Clemson has no chance. This is the best football team ever fielded, and the game was over at halftime. But outside of that, the other 3 games against Bama have all been good, competitive games. But if they play Bama this year, it's not going to be competitive in my personal opinion. I know Bama has not been Bama this year for whatever reason, but Clemson's offense is just too inconsistent. I can't figure it out. All year long, they've said that since their wide receivers aren't producing, they need to get the tight ends more involved. And then yesterday against South Carolina, the tight ends were non-existent the whole game. You played Notre Dame. After the game, you come out and said, we should have ran the ball more. Yesterday, you can't throw the ball at all, so you don't run the ball. It's like they're not learning from their mistakes. I don't understand it. They've also said all year long that DJ plays better the faster he plays. The faster we snap the ball, the faster we go, the better he is. You play the Gamecocks, you come out, and you're slower than pond water. I don't understand it. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Now, of course, DJ still has 2 years of eligibility left, but he has not made a decision about next year. He might be there, might not. Honestly, really, truly, I don't think it matters because as of right now, I would still pick DJ over Cade because, yes, DJ is inconsistent sometimes throwing the ball, but Cade Klubnik can't throw the ball at all. But not only that, when you've got wide receivers that can't catch, can't block, and can't create separation, I don't really know if any quarterback is going to matter. But that's just my 2 cents on it. Any thoughts on any of the games from yesterday? Please feel free to let me know. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. What does corn say when it gets a compliment? Ah, shucks. And that wraps it up for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.